really moved me. Well, today in the little, the little sentence or two that speakers send in to describe what they're going to talk about, I use the word ponder, and ponder, I suppose, can mean different things, to think about things, to consider things, but it also means to weigh things in the mind. And so my pondering has been basically to try to find little things that fit in with this kind of general idea I'm thinking of, even though it's not really strongly formulated. But I'm hoping that by the end of this talk, I'll know what I'm thinking, because I'm not quite sure. These are just kind of pieces that have come together. Um, I start out with this awareness that human experience, the experiences we experience, shape who we are, and who we are also shapes our experiences. It's this interesting interrelatedness. When I was a kid, I used to love to watch football on Sundays, and especially I really loved watching, like, the Green Bay Packers and the Chicago Bears or the Minnesota Vikings playing in those winter days when the snow is just coming down like crazy. The field's covered with snow. You can't hardly see, and the players are really struggling to play the game, but it's in the middle of the snow, it's like a snowstorm, and they don't call the game. They just keep playing. I loved those games. And then I loved taking my football that I always held when I watched those games and going outside in my short sleeve shirt, playing catch with someone in the sunny California summer or fall or winter, wherever it was. We had rainy season and not rainy season. And so for me, when I think about winter and I think about the coming Christmas and all those thoughts that are associated with it, I don't think of snow as something I want to experience. And so I love the commercial. I think it's Corona that has a commercial, the little house that's on this kind of like this, uh, and it's got palm trees and they light up for Christmas. And my wife and other people say, "Oh, that'd be terrible with no snow," and I'm going, "Yeah, that's the Christmas I want." And people say, "Well, if you live somewhere else, you'd miss the seasons," and not for me. So my experiences have to do with the seasons, with where I am and how I interact with the world around me. The natural world, in this particular case, certainly um, influences me. In the Christian church, this is the third Sunday of Advent, in the liturgical calendar. And it's interesting because Advent has to do with awaiting the arrival of, or the birth of, Jesus Christ. And it's interesting too, because Jesus, according to most scholars, was probably born in the fall around October, but it doesn't fit well with the season. So they kind of shifted it to December 25th, which happens to fall in with the Roman Saturnalia, the celebration that the Romans had, welcoming in the possibilities of a renewal. And so they kind of just threw Jesus into that area, his birth, to fit in. And it's kind of nice, to think about something coming in the midst of the darkness and the cold of winter, this idea that something's coming, this change in the season. So it's really a season of anticipation in the midst of the darkness and in the midst of the cold. If you're not living in California, in the midst of the cold, that promises. Howard Thurman, um, a very important African American theologian, incredible writer. He said this. He said, "In the middle of a dark wood, when the path is uncertain, if we stand still long enough, our eyes adjust to the darkness, and the contours of a pathway home appear. I've had a lot of those times in my life when it felt like it was dark. And sometimes I feel like the way to deal with the darkness is frantic movements, frantic attempts to dispel whatever fears or worries I have are. And I just get frantic with how to do this or have gotten that way. But I think Thurman's advice mirrors the experience of humans if we just stop, immerse ourselves into the unknowing and the darkness. A light appears, and the contours of a pathway home may show up. One of the most important experiences for me was back in January of 1991 in the woods of northern Wisconsin on a men's weekend retreat. There was snow on the ground and I was cold. And the coldness was not just that of the shivering of my skin, of the cold inhale of air, and the only slightly less cold of my exhale. I was looking for answers to the questions in my life, my struggles, my fears, and at its essence, the question of who I was. I was cold on the inside. And during this retreat, I was told to walk in the woods, to look for something, to look for a rock, a twig, anything that called to me, that grabbed my attention. I was to find and to touch the universe's Mercury, the messenger of the gods. And I found it. I am one of the original tree huggers. I found this tree that just seemed to stand out. And somehow it called to me. Now, is this weird? It's kind of weird, isn't it? And I just had to go over and just embrace this tree. And the first thought that came to my mind was, man, I'm glad there's nobody else around to see this. There's a certain sense of resistance. But I overcame that resistance and I embraced this tree. I attempted to embrace the cold. Attempted is an important word. Attempted to embrace the cold. I went through it. I got through it. And ever since then, I've had an even more heightened awareness of how the world around me affects who I am, and I affect the world that exists. Sometimes I get these strange messages from the world, from nature. I don't think they're not. It's not like they're planned. It's just that sometimes I think if my awareness is open, I can project into the world important things that happen. It's hard to explain. I remember, and maybe I've told this here before, but I want to repeat the story. My mother died maybe 7 years ago, and she was pretty insular. She didn't have a lot of friends. And of course, I was living here in Indiana, and my mother has a plot next to has a plot next to my father's grave in Fort Sill, Oklahoma. And so I traveled from here to there by myself. I was senior minister in the church at the time, and they wished me well and did some other nice things to kind of send me on my way. My wife and daughter couldn't go, didn't want them to go, wanted them to stay and continue on with their lives. It was just going to go for a while. So I went out there and drove out to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, next to Lawton, Oklahoma, and was thinking about my life and how it had gotten to where it was, and thinking about my connections to my parents, and losing finally the second of my two parents, and how to deal with it all, and the aloneness of the experience. So I went out and before the actual meeting of the two people from the funeral home that were going to inter her body, just a few of us, It was only the two people from the funeral home in Lawton and three of the people who were supervising the digging of the hole where we would place my mother's casket and her inside. Before I went to the Wichita Falls Wildlife Refuge, just outside of Lawton. It's a beautiful place. It's a little mountain, a couple mountains, lakes, and there are there's at least two herds of buffalo that wander through this area. And every time I go, I've been there many times since we lived in Lawton for a few years, and I try to go back occasionally and go into wildlife refuge. I always run into these herds of buffalo. It's just fascinating. It's like, you stop your car because you can't go anywhere because these buffalo are walking across the road and you're kind of stuck. And it's also longhorn steer and a really cool little prairie dog town. Neat stuff in there. But I was really looking forward to seeing the buffalo. And usually you just can't help it. You just run out there and they're there. So I drove around and I couldn't find them. I drove and I drove and I drove and I drove for the longest time trying to find the buffalo, and I just could not find them. And then as I was thinking, well, this is it, I'm going to have to go. As I was driving out there to my right, there was this lone buffalo in this field, a little bit of a rise, just standing there. And I pulled over and I thought, oh my God, that's me. That's me. Alone. Now I knew that buffalo that had a herd, it would return to the herd, at least, I'm not an expert on buffalo behavior, but I suspected that the buffalo would return to his herd. But right then, this buffalo was alone in the midst of the world around him. And I thought, that is me. And for some reason, recognizing my aloneness made me feel less alone. It's the oddest thing. And as I assumed that he would go back to his herd, I knew that I would go back to mine. But in the meantime, it was a time to feel the aloneness, to feel the sadness, to be immersed in the winter of my life, knowing that there's a spring, but trusting that somehow the winter is transformative. And somehow our experience of the winter in our lives has a certain element of possibility and hope and can be transformative. And yeah, I don't like winter. I want to get out of it. And when I've gone through those difficult times, I didn't like it. I wanted to get out of it. But somehow there's this interesting interrelationship between dark and light. And it means immersing ourselves, I suppose, immersing myself in both. Sharice Nana, who is a writer, well, I found something she wrote kind of interesting. She wrote, winter is a time of year when we tend to go inwards, and the myth of Persephone symbolizes this descent. Persephone is a young maiden who is abducted by Hades and taken to his kingdom in the underworld. Her mother, Demeter, the goddess of harvest, is devastated by the news and turns the land barren with her grief. When Persephone finally returns months later, Demeter's hope is restored and new shoots of life spring from the earth. But Persephone is not here to stay. Hades crowned her as his queen, and therefore she must return with him to the underworld every year at the same time for 3 to 6 months, bringing us the cycle of the seasons. This story, Sharice goes on to say, this story has also been used to represent those times in our creative cycle where we must have our own personified winter. Everything goes through stages of yin and yang, waning and waxing, inspiration and expression. It's necessary to have this downtime to go inward and reflect. It's as though we need to compost old matter in order to refresh the soil and ready it for new growth. This is a difficult feat in a world that's obsessed with productivity and linear expansion. The poet Wendell Berry wrote a very short poem, but filled with, I think, interesting imagery. He wrote, "To go in the dark with the light is to know the light. To know the dark, go without sight, and find that the dark too blooms and sings and is traveled by dark feet and dark wings." So I was trying to put all this stuff together in this pondering thing that I was trying to do. And I came across a interesting website by Eileen Carey. Now, she talks about uh, the 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 purpose of winter, and it's a pretty. I use the term happy, clappy, sappy. I mean, it's kind of like, oh, I don't know, just too happy. But just her kind of like four approaches to winter, I thought were important. She said that when we're in winter, and I want to think about the winter of my life, the winters of my life, she said the sun will come out tomorrow, or maybe the next day, but it will come out. She suggests take things slow. And then she suggests expect the unexpected and then roll with it. And her fourth point is that beauty exists in all things. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross wrote, "The most beautiful people we have known are those who have known defeat, known suffering, known struggle, known loss, and found their way out of the depths. These persons have an appreciation, a sensitivity, and an understanding of life that fills them with compassion, gentleness, and a deep loving concern. Beautiful people do not just happen." Sitting Bull, the Lakota chief, said, "Behold, my brothers, the spring has come. The earth has received the embraces of the sun, and we shall soon see the results of that love. Every seed has awakened, and so has all animal life. It is through this mysterious power that we too have our being, and we therefore yield to our neighbors, even our animal neighbors, the same right as ourselves to inhabit this land." Roberta Hill of the Wisconsin Oneida tribe wrote, "When birds break open the sky, a smell of snow blossoms in the wind. You sleep, wrapped up in blue dim light, like a distant leaf of sage. I drink the shadow under your ear and rise, clumsy, glazed with cold, sun gleaming in frost. Reach me, touch me through the window, this seed that longs little by little to flare up orange and sing. Branches turn to threads against the sun." So in the winter of my life, the winters of my life, I have longed for the sun to reach me, to make me flare up orange and to sing. And as I enter into, I'm certain, I'm hopeful, more winters of my life, I too will long for the sun to turn into threads and enwrap me in the orange and sing. Blessed be.